So we had some engagement at the beginning to tell our stakeholders about what we're trying to do. Now we are having this engagement to discuss the tax bills. They've generated a lot of interest, which is understandable. And we thought that our most knowledgeable stakeholders are the CFOs and the tax consultants. So if those stakeholders don't understand what we're doing, then nobody will understand. If those people understand the reforms, they will help us educate others. That's why we dedicated this session to CFOs and tax consultants. Because the room is small, we couldn't invite a lot of people. We invited only 100 people, but we have thousands of people joining on Zoom and on YouTube. So we'll try and accommodate those who have joined us online in terms of their comments and questions. So this is the outline of what we will discuss. I usually want to start with the socioeconomic context, so we know that tax does not operate in isolation. We need to understand those issues driving our recommendations, our thought process, and all of that. Even though we have the bills at the National Assembly, input from this engagement today can still help us in our engagement with the National Assembly as to what the final bills should look like. So our country is struggling. The economy is not doing well. There are reforms that are necessary, but they've come with economic pain and hardship. And we need to recognize that. To the right of the screen, you see the multidimensional poverty index that was done about 3 years ago, showing that as at that time, 133 million Nigerians live in multidimensional poverty. That was before first subsidy removal and flotation of the naira. If you repeat that study today, that number would have gone up by a double-digit percentage. That is not a very good place to be as a country when far more than 60–70% of your population are living in poverty. The dimensions of poverty are education, and this is not university education, this is basic education in the first 9 years of life. Many of our citizens can't access education. Second dimension is health, nutrition, food, and time to health care. Can you get to the nearest healthcare center within 30 minutes of trekking, biking? Over 100 million of our people can't even boast of that. So people die of curable diseases. Another dimension is living standard, access to safe drinking water. Is it reliable when you have it? Or you drink safe water today, the next one is in 2 months' time. Sanitation. Just to answer the call of nature for many of our citizens is rocket science. Housing material, and this is just having roof, plaster on the wall, and having a floor that is not natural. Then insecurity and decent job. So these are the most important issues to our country today, and it's likely to be for the foreseeable future because you can't deal with poverty overnight. The economy is not growing fast enough. In fact, in dollar terms, the economy has been declining. Inflation is very high. We can say there's inflation all over the world, but our own inflation is more than 5 times the global average. So which means beyond what's happening globally, there are issues we must deal with that are peculiar to Nigeria, and some of them are structural issues. I told you about poverty that we have across the land. Whether you look at monetary poverty, about 100 million. If you look at multidimensional, about 133. This is even about 3–4 years old data. Government revenue is low. Public debt is high, as well as how much we're spending to service the debt was as high as 96% in 2022, came down to 74% last year. We expect it should be less than 74% for 2024, but even at 50%, you should still be concerned. Why should you be spending about half of your revenue just to service debt? We know interest rates have been going up because the CBN is trying to fight inflation, so that's adding to the numbers for 2024. Otherwise, 2024 would have been a lot more decent. Investment in our country is declining. In the whole of Q2, Nigeria attracted 29.83 million, not billion, so that's not an error, $1 million for the whole country. And I saw a report about 2 days ago saying that we have all-time low investment in our stock market, foreign investment I mean, in our stock market. So this figure should be billions, not million. And I do believe that FDI, foreign direct investment, is a better indicator of confidence in an economy than FPI. Because foreign portfolio investment, I'll do my calculations, is 6 months save, 1 year save, I'll come in and get out. But foreign direct investment is how people tell you we're here for the long haul. We believe in this economy. So we need to bear that in mind. Immigration, people who are leaving and relocating, and that has slowed down, not because people no longer want to leave, it's just more expensive to leave than previously. And many of the places that people like to relocate to are also not smiling. So people are having a second thought. But to the extent that the issues that are driving people to want to leave haven't been addressed, then we ought to take it very seriously as part of policy formulation. Divestment, we've seen companies that have exited. We've seen those that have scaled down. From 5 plants, they are down to 2. Those who have 1 plant, they are down from 60% capacity utilization to 40%. So we've seen that. We've seen Nigerian businesses closing down. Manufacturers Association of Nigeria has some numbers that are concerning. We know there are new businesses, but we know overall this is not the direction we want for our country. But also to make sure that we are not living here with the impression that everything is negative. Because on the average, Nigerians tend to amplify what's not working about their country more than any other country that I know of. And we play down on whatever is working. Even in the work of our committee, that has been our experience. You have bills, regulations, executive orders. You have 200 provisions. And people are happy with 199. But they will not talk about it. They will come with the one and say, what on earth are you people doing? Say, well, at least say that the 199 are okay. Otherwise, our principals, whether it's the presidents, whether they're the governors, whether they're the lawmakers, will write on the back of the one that they hear that people don't seem to like and say, maybe we don't need these reforms anymore. And people tend to just say the ones they like quietly. So that is the reason why I thought it would be nice to also put on a slide what we see as where we are as a country. What is it that is not working or you call work in progress? And what is it that is positive that we need to do more of? Number one is the exchange rates. Naira needs to recover. So personally, I take the view that you can't even stabilize at 1.6 or 1.7 and begin to celebrate it. It's nothing to celebrate. We did some analysis and looked at the exchange rate of the Kenya shillings to the US dollars, South African rand to the US dollars, and Naira to the US dollars 10 years ago and today. And guess what? Naira has depreciated against the USD 6.5 times faster than both Kenya shillings and South African rand. And when we looked at the value of import to GDP, and export to GDP, those two other countries were not doing better than Nigeria. So if Naira had only just maintained the same level of strength and stability as the Kenya shillings or South African rand, today the Naira will be under 300 Naira to the dollar. And in fact, Nigeria's economy would already be about $1 trillion. The middle class will be maybe 60, 70 million people. Every company in the world will pay attention to Nigeria. Band A tariff will be 1/6 of what it is. PMS price will be around 200, even with the reform. So we think that even dealing with the exchange rate issue is fundamental. And we also recognize that the issue cannot be dealt with only from the monetary side. So there has to be the fiscal side as well. So some of our reform proposals are in this light to try and address this very important issue. Of course, we know inflation is high. A lot of it is, factors of production is what is driving the inflation that we have. And that's why the cost of doing business is high. Poverty, declining decent jobs, unemployment rate officially is low, it's about 5.3%, but poverty is around 70%. So the only way to reconcile it is that there are loads of people who are working hard, but they can't even feed themselves. So they're the working poor. So while we don't need to debate whether there's unemployment, there's no debate that there is no decent employment. Interest rate is high. So interest rate is high. So we saw a report that shows that over the past, I think, first half of the year, the range of borrowing from banks by businesses is from 32% to 50%. I said to myself, what legitimate business can anyone do and pay interest at 50% and not go out of business? Because if your MPR, monetary policy rate, is around 28%, and you have the asymmetric corridor, because when banks are borrowing, you have to add the 500 basis points. So banks themselves borrow at about 31, 32. So it's not surprising that they will lend at a lot more than that. So you can't grow an economy with those kind of interest rates. And we still have issues with insecurity and social cohesion. There are just many citizens that are just unhappy. I saw a report about, I think it was done for African countries, and they were asking whether, one, you're happy about the direction of travel of your country, and you can guess where Nigeria was on that. Nigeria was number one, with a lot of gap to the second one. And it doesn't mean that Nigeria is where you have the most difficulties. It's just that Nigerians are the ones that are most unhappy with their country. And when you have citizens that are unhappy, things are hard, because it means that even trust, the level of trust is very low. And when there is significant trust deficit, everything is hard, because with the best of intentions, you'll be misinterpreted. You'll be suspected. They don't trust you. Why should they believe you want to reduce tax rates? We've put up public communication from our committee where every single bullet point was reducing taxes. And then you go to comment section and say, you want to tax everybody to death? I say, is it the same thing we posted, or is it something else? Well, for them, there's no point reading. They just know that what you want to do is you want to tax them more. That's trust deficit. Public financial management needs to be more efficient, and there should be better coordination of government policies and better public communication. We don't communicate well enough, and sometimes when we communicate, we miscommunicate. And we need to deal with that. But what's working for us? Balance of trade, current account surplus is good and getting better. So that's positive. Inflation is slowing down in developed markets. So they are cutting rates, although there was a little, increase in the US inflation rates, but I believe it's temporary. But generally, Europe, America, part of Asia, cutting interest rates. When they do that, we become more attractive for those funds to come in our direction. Our budget deficit is declining in percentage, as a percentage of GDP. Revenue is rising, though still very small, and government is repaying back ways and means. Government is repaying back ways and means. We had a very productive session with lawmakers, I think it was 2 days ago. And one of the points we're making there is that when government prints money, let's just call it what it is. Yeah, it just prints money to spend. When government does that, it is a way of collecting taxes without legislation. You know, when government prints money to spend, you don't go on the streets and go and protest because they haven't come to you to ask you for money. But if we printed 40 trillion naira without corresponding increase in economic output, if that 40 trillion naira represented 20% of our GDP, it means that the 1,000 naira you have in your pocket, in your wallet, and in your bank account is now worth 800 naira. Government has just collected 20% from your money without legislation. This is why we cannot continue to say, we will not pay tax. What are they doing with it? And then they will print. And then we'll lose value of the money we have. Whether by legislation or otherwise, we must pay tax. I think when, this quotation about only two things are certain in life, death and taxes. They have not even thought about ways and means at that time. The bad thing with printing money to spend is that that tax affects everyone, but affects the poorest people disproportionately because they don't have assets that can preserve the value of inflation, right? And that is a potential crisis waiting to happen when you depress your vulnerable citizens even the more. So they wake up and they feel hopeless. So at that point, they cannot be rational. And then you're surprised that people are supposed to do hunger protests and then you don't know what they're doing in the north. You're not supposed to understand what they're doing because they're not being rational. They can't be. We're not justifying anything, but we're just saying the situation in which we find ourselves. But we are repaying back those ways and means. So that's good news. Crude oil production is rising. Latest report says about 1.8 million barrels a day. That's good news. And we have commenced local refining of crude oil. We like drama, so don't worry about the back and forth. The fundamental point is now we are refining our products. And the information we have even suggests that Dangote alone is now producing more than we can consume. So which means local refining would wet the market and we can also export. So that's not only just good news for the availability of the product, but for the strength of the naira. That's the biggest demand on our FX regime. Positive outlook by the rating agencies. 3 major rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and S&P. 2 of them says positive outlook, 1 says stable. We're not looking for their validation, so don't get me wrong. But they are knowledgeable third parties that are objective. So they sat down with our committee, all of them, several times. And when you see them interrogate you, you know they know what they're asking, right? So when they listen to all of that, look at your plans, and they come up to say it's positive outlook, then that's a knowledgeable third party who is unbiased, giving you an assessment. And improvements in capital flows, especially foreign portfolio investments, is getting better. So overall, good news is that we have more greens, if that counts for anything, than the work in progress. So let me quickly tell you about the work of the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee. I don't think there's anybody in this room that is hearing about this committee for the first time. But just as a reminder, so this committee was set up by Mr. President and inaugurated in August 2023. We're given 3 broad mandates around fiscal governance, which is look at our country's finances, revenue, spending, borrowing, policies, monetary, fiscal, trade, coordination, not only just within federal government, but across subnational, fiscal limits, are they appropriate? What should be debt to GDP, debt service to revenue, and so on and so forth. And how do we ensure that they are respected? And if they are not, there should be consequences for them not being respected. So that's the first mandate, fiscal governance. I know that if you go on the streets and ask anybody, if you're lucky and they know about this committee, they'll say it's to raise taxes. And we've said these are our mandates many times, but this is raising taxes. So the second mandate is revenue transformation. It has 4 sub-components. Number 1 is tax. For tax, the objective is actually to reduce the burden of tax and collect more by closing the tax gap. Our data suggests that the tax gap in Nigeria is about 70%. In other words, what we are collecting today versus what we could be collecting today, not tomorrow, has a gap of about 70%. That gap has 2 sub-components. The first one is compliance gap. Under declaration, tax evasion, or just not showing up with maybe you have not even registered for taxes. Compliance gap is about 50% out of the 70. The remaining 20 is the policy gap. Policy gap is we've decided that if you are very close to Mr. President or Finance Minister, you know someone that is powerful, you get waivers. Waivers, incentives. By the way, we are not saying waivers and incentives are bad, but if you don't design them properly, they create economic distortion, not only just losing revenue for the government. So where we expect to increase government revenue, it's not from adding more taxes to the people. We want to take taxes away, but then close the tax gap so that people who are not paying begin to pay. And you create a level playing field for the economy. And then things grow and revenue will come as a consequence. In addition to the tax leg, I told you that the revenue transformation has 4 sub-components. One is tax. The second one is government assets. I was speaking to someone who heads a government agency yesterday, and the person told me, let me just even say it was somebody in the sports ministry. There's no ministry anymore now, it's commission. When the guy told me the kind of asset they have over there, even me, I was surprised. The level of assets, from stadia to sports centers to something facility to games village, and these things are not generating revenue. So government assets, we think it will be in the region of 100 trillion naira. We even need to know what the assets are and where they are, and then what do we do with them? The ones we need to sell, because private sector can manage them better, we should sell them. The ones that government needs to manage, let's manage and sweat them and get like double-digit returns annually. From government assets alone, we can easily generate more than we're generating today from companies' income tax, personal income tax, and VAT combined. Yes. Yes. The third one is government-owned enterprises. And I know people are thinking about NNPC. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Imagine NNPC giving us $10 to $15 billion in taxes, dividend, and share of profits every year. That would be cool. It's not only NNPC, but that's the biggest. And the number 4 is natural resources, oil, gas, solid minerals. A lot of potential. To be honest, Nigeria has absolutely no business being a poor country. We have everything. We just need to make sure they work for us and for the generality of the Nigerian people. So that's the second mandate, okay? I said the first one was fiscal governance. Second one was revenue transformation. The third one is the one that excites me the most, is economic growth facilitation and competitiveness. Put differently, how can we all grow together? What are those bottlenecks and impediments that is making it difficult for a small business to become medium size to be large to become multinational? Why don't we have Nigerian businesses today in 10s and 20s earning billions of dollars globally? Why not? Why is even NNPC not global by today with subsidiaries in like 15 countries? So those impediments, we sat down with various stakeholder groups, including exporters, who are thoroughly frustrated just trying to get anything out of the country. Identifying those impediments, overregulation, regulators overreach, multiple taxation, bureaucracy, the list is long. When I speak to some investors, and this was an experience I didn't have before because I was in the private sector. You are speaking to investors and you are thinking, they sound like people that have been held hostage because they feel helpless, like we're going through this. Nobody is listening to us. Can you help? We did nothing wrong, but somebody said this need not follow this. One company came and said that they said this is their product, they had not received an approval, so they should recall everything. I said, but what's wrong with the product? They had written, waiting for certification. People who want to export need to go through more than 20 processes that last about 2 months, and you need to pay at every stage. Those certifications and permits are not needed anywhere, but Nigeria wants to do it so you can export. So those issues are things we must address as part of growth and competitiveness. So our committee was constituted intentionally to be very diverse and inclusive. We had over 80 members and over 45, actually over 50 people in our secretariat. It wasn't physical. So you won't find one big office. For people that have been to my office in Lagos, say, this is your office, eh? My office is the size of this table. And I said, because we want to lead by example. If we're saying that we need physical discipline, then we should not be wasteful. We did all the work we did without going to any country to understudy them physically, right? And we've understudied many countries. Zoom was doing the magic for us. Send questions, set up a meeting, discuss it, do follow up, instead of carrying 20, 30 people to go to the UK to go and understudy. So in constituting our team, we're very intentional. So we have people from all the geopolitical zones. We have good representation by gender and youth. We have 45 undergraduates from 22 universities across Nigeria that work with us in our secretariat. We give them research to do. So in the process of doing research, they take more interest and they sit at our meetings so they can also contribute, right? So that we're able to get the perspective of the young people. And the way we did it was, for the 22 universities, we did a competitive selection process, took the best male and best female. So 2 in 22 places is 44. And then there's Orire, who is the star girl that we took to the president during inauguration. That's how we got 45. So a couple of those students are also here with us today. Then we have over 20 government institutions represented, from customs to justice to trade, and the list goes on. Then revenue authorities, we have 6 from the 6 geopolitical zone, and then we have the FRS. And the customs service is also represented. The organized private sector, well represented, from Manufacturers Association of Nigeria to chambers of commerce like SCCI, and small business association are well represented. We also have professional bodies, ICANN, CITN, ANAN, MBA, very well represented. They were officially represented by their president, but of course what that means is they can always mobilize those resources in bringing submission to us. We have the big four accounting firm represented and a few medium-sized and small firms also represented, so we can get that broad perspective. And then there is the civil society. So this was a very representative committee, which is one of the points we are trying to make, so that nobody will say, some people from the Southwest sat down and wrote the bills. No, there's nothing like that. It's well inclusive. We set the philosophy for ourselves that we want to develop for our country, which is what should be our direction from the fiscal perspective. We want to be modern, simple, and adaptive, growth enabling and competitive. And we do not want to tax investment, no longer taxing capital. We do not want to tax production. Don't tax poverty. And everything you do, make sure you do not tax the seed. Wait for the fruit. So, and these are not nice things to say. These were things we interpreted into the bills. For example, currently, there's something called the minimum tax in Nigeria. The company has made a loss. You ask them to say, nonetheless, you must pay some tax. You are taxing their capital because they didn't have profit. It's one of the fastest ways to kill any business. So we've proposed for that to go completely. You want to set up a factory in Nigeria today, you buy equipment, you pay a few other things, you pay VAT. And you cannot get input credit for those VAT you have paid. You have to wait and claim capital allowance, which is only a small fraction of the amount you've invested. We're saying if a business invests in assets, let them get the input credit back 100%. So what are we doing? We're saying don't tax investments. I want you to invest. Why am I taxing you now? So we've translated that into our policy recommendation. Don't tax poverty. We have to do the calculations. What is the average size of a family in Nigeria? 5. More in the north than in the south, but on the average, 5 people make up a household in Nigeria. If you're lucky, 2 of them have anything that looks like decent job. So how much should 2 people earn to take care of 5 people so they don't fall below the poverty line? We did the maths. And it gave us an idea of what should be exempted from personal income tax. So that takes us to the principles that guided what we were doing, right? I'm already speaking to you about data. We're like 100% big on data. We'll listen to everybody, we empathize with you, but when we are done, say, please send us data. We cannot propose policies based on sentiments or emotions or narrow perspective. They're not going to be helpful for our country in the medium to long term, and we cannot afford that. We'll be failing ourselves and failing our country. It's for us national interest first, national interest next, national interest at all times. We believe that if Nigeria is working, everybody will find a place and a space for themselves within a Nigeria that works. If what you're doing is inconsistent with Nigeria's national interest, you should not be doing it. You should do something else. So that is why for us is national interest, and you'll see that in all the recommendations. I'll spare you the details of the other ones. You will get access to this presentation after the session. We had extensive public consultations. Apart from our membership being diverse, every meeting that we had was a consultation, because you sit at every meeting. By the way, that large membership that we had to break up into 5 subcommittees. So we worked in subcommittees. We were meeting every single day, sometimes till late. This is one of the joy that I have as a Nigerian. And I'm saying this with a sense of responsibility. I do not know of any other country that I've been to or that I know of in the world where their citizens are so ready to make sacrifices for their country. So I always say that people have to make a distinction between the fact that many Nigerians don't like their government, but they love their country, and they're not the same thing. So that is why someone will leave their jobs, right, and commit time to reforms without asking for anything. And then it doesn't matter that they might go on Twitter the following day and complain, right? It's their right to do that. They're not happy with where the country is. I'm not myself. So, but Nigerians love their country. And that's a good thing. So, we have a lot of engagements. People submitted memoranda. We received submission from every single state in Nigeria. Even us were pleasantly surprised. All 36 states and FCT, we got submissions from every single state in Nigeria that went into the work we did. We had sectoral engagement with about 40 different sectors: fintech, telecommunication, SMEs, farmers, Nigerians with disability, Nigerians in the diaspora. We learned a lot from the Nigerians in the diaspora because it was a very good way of getting experience. Like, where you are, how do you deal with your taxes? And they shared the experiences with us, which was very useful. So we are grateful to them. If any of them have joined our session today. We had investors meetings. We had publications, press, and social media. We had engagement with government from lawmakers. We had a retreat with the Senate, House of Representatives. We had sessions with Governors Forum, with the National Economic Council. We had different ministries and ministers, of course, revenue services, other agencies and government-owned enterprises. And in some cases, we set up joint committees because we wanted to walk through the details of our recommendations. Like, we had a joint committee with the government of Lagos State, which we are very grateful to the governor of Lagos State for. He said, let's set up a cabinet committee with your committee to walk through the details. We worked for over 6 months. Ministry of Trade, Industry and Investment is another major one where we had to set up a committee to walk through the details. So we had a few of those. Then we have the international community, right? But don't get this wrong. Nobody is dictating anything to us. We're not being arrogant, but we're just too good not to know what we want. But we can learn from others so we don't repeat their mistakes, and though we don't reinvent the wheels. So, and I have to say, we receive more than we expected in terms of support. Whether it's from the Bretton Woods institutions, UNDP, African Development Bank, government of the UK, EU, United States, portfolio managers, rating agencies, we had engagement with all of them. And they're very supportive, even up till now. Other things were around surveys. We conducted inquiries. We had loads of people volunteer to work for our committee for free. Loads of people, hundreds, with different skills. When you go on social media and you see comments, you see most likely more than half of it is abusing us and cursing us. We don't take them personal. We just skip. But if we read and there's something meaningful, we pick the message from those comments. So even comments on social media fed into the work that we're doing. And then we use publicly available information as well. So what did we find out? Let me tell you a few of our fiscal, we call them fiscal findings from all of this work that we have been doing. First one is maybe common knowledge, but putting it into data. Nigeria is running on a low budget. The entire budget of the federal government and all the states with their local governments, including the amendment to the Appropriation Act to add 6.2 trillion for 2024, is 35.2 for the federal government, 16 trillion for all the states. Total is 51 trillion. Convert to USD is $32 billion. $32 billion is the size of the budget of Kenya, 54 million people. It's less than 1/4 of the budget of South Africa, $130 billion for a little over 60 million people. Even by African standard, we're significantly underperforming. This is not even our revenue, it's our ambitious budget. This budget is not sufficient to cater for transportation infrastructure in Nigeria. Just trying to fix roads, maintain them, do rails, maybe a few airports. This amount is not enough. Corruption is a problem in Nigeria. Waste is, right? I'm not playing down on those. But even if you eliminate those 100%, you have $32 billion, including borrowing. That's all you can spend for more than 200 million people. There's a fundamental problem we must address. How do we get this number to be 150, 200 billion dollars, not 32? That's where we need to get to. And that's why for us, it's not incremental progress with revenue, 15%, 10% over last year. No, it's transformation. And the only way that can happen is to allow the economy grow, because you cannot give what you don't have. If I'm poor, it doesn't matter how effective your enforcements are. You just can't get anything from me. But if I have a little bit of money to give, maybe with enforcement, I can pay you some taxes. What else did we find? All revenue sources for Nigeria provide extremely low yields. Nigeria has 8 major sources of revenue, and they're on the screen. Those are the 8 major sources of revenue: personal income tax, property tax, stamp duties, VAT, and land. You know, interestingly, 5 of the 8 are almost exclusively assigned to states. You know, there's this debate in Nigeria of you need to empower the state more. It's not supported by data. Look at it. Personal income tax, state, right? Property, between them and local government. Stamp duties, entirely state. VAT, do you know VAT is also state? Because if you take the amount derived from the FCT out of VAT, that's what the federal government is sharing. Yeah, so actually, in fact, the states are getting more than is derived from them, because import VAT and international VAT in Nigeria is about 51% of the total VAT collection, right? If we decide to collect VAT as a state tax, then states will not be able to collect VAT on imports. It will be collected by the federal government. In the US, states collect sales tax, but they cannot collect it on imports. So the US government, federal government collects whatever name they've called it. It's not called sales tax, but they collect it on import. If you do that in Nigeria to make VAT the tax of the states, almost 50% of the revenue today will become the revenue of the federal government. So when I say to you that VAT in Nigeria is actually exclusively the tax of the state, I'm actually understating it. They're collecting more than their fair share. And land is almost entirely the resource of the, you know, this is next to human capital resource. The largest resource is land, more than oil and gas. This is almost entirely in the hand of states, isn't it? In the US, states own less than 10% of land. The federal government owns about 1/3 of land, and the rest is with families and private individuals. In Nigeria, it's almost 100. But what's my message here is not advocating for the federal government or the state government. No, we're putting out the facts so you know what is driving our recommendations. But beyond those 5, there are other 3. Corporate income tax, custom duties, petroleum and other solid minerals, and solid mineral, not other solid minerals. These ones are shared. These ones are given to states. So the problem in Nigeria is not to take more from federal and give to states. The problem is to enhance the yield from every source of revenue. We said the budget was low, but the revenue is even lower. In 2023, these are the numbers from taxes. From oil, we didn't get a lot because NNPC said they were even owing. So if you look at the numbers there, you cannot reconcile it. It doesn't matter how good you are as an accountant, mathematician, or economist. What's the number saying? Nigeria collected 1.53 trillion from personal income tax in 2023. In that same year, South Africa collected the equivalent of 50.5 trillion naira. That's more than 30 times, right? About 30 times what we collected. Actually, more than that. Even Kenya collected 5.8 trillion naira equivalent. I did one small maths. The lowest personal income tax rate in Nigeria is 1%. The highest effective rate today, personal income tax rate, is 19%. Do a simple average, it gives you 10, right? Use 10% to gross up the tax we paid. It means that Nigerians said that they earned income in the whole of 2023 that was about 15 trillion naira. If you look at consumption GDP adjusted for private credits, it was close to 200 trillion. How is it that we earned income of 15 trillion, but we spent more than 150 trillion on consumption? It gives you the idea of how wide and large the tax gap is. There's significant amount of evasion. The other one that is even more telling, by the way, this personal income tax, while the rates are higher in both Kenya and South Africa, if you're a rich person, you pay up to 41%. In Kenya, you pay up to 35%. In Nigeria, the statutory rate is 24%. Effective is less. But that aside, right? In South Africa, you do not pay personal income tax until you start earning more than 660,000 naira a month. Even in Kenya, you're exempted until you earn about 282,000 naira per month. In Nigeria, we tax you once you earn 30,000 naira and one. So you see, this is us trying to tax anybody and everybody we can find. Yet, the revenues are not showing. And the answer is very obvious. We are focusing on the wrong taxpayers. This huge amount that South Africa collected, 90% of it came from the top 5% of their population. In Nigeria, you struggle to find the data. Maybe it's in the rounding errors, what the top 5% have paid. The other one I want to tell you about, people say, well, but there's poverty, right? Look at it. Per capita income is 1.6 in Nigeria. It's 6,000 plus in South Africa. It's 2,100 in Kenya. And I get that. But I'll say to you that in any country where there's high inequality like Nigeria, where you have over 130 million people living in multidimensional poverty, and the average, the per capita is 1.6, it means that if you disaggregate, and I take out the bottom 150 million people, and I focus on the top 60 million people, I can guarantee you the per capita income of that top 60 million people will be very close to South Africa. So I'm trying to say that this number is not an excuse for this number. After all, South Africa has only about 60 million people and they collect that. The one that is more revealing is customs. In 2023, customs collected 3.2 trillion naira. Kenya collected 8.9 trillion naira. We looked at the value of imports. What did we import? Kenya imported $23 billion. Nigeria imported $66 billion. Nigeria imported nearly 3 times what Kenya imported and collected 1/3 of what Kenya collected. All things being equal, Nigeria Customs Service should have collected 27. They should have collected 9 times what they collected. And you can argue anything. You can argue waivers, but every country has waivers. Every country has whatever it is you want to argue. I'm not convinced. The numbers are not adding up. Anyway. And tax morale is low. Nigerians don't want to pay their taxes, and they have their reasons for not wanting to pay. So this study was conducted a few years back, 3 or 4 years ago, and I had the opportunity to lead the roundtable. It was done by the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, but extremely useful for our reforms. We asked Nigerians across Nigeria, Do you think you should pay your taxes? And do you believe that tax evasion is wrong and is punishable? Only 17% of Nigerian adults believe that they should pay their taxes and that evasion is wrong and punishable. 83% will do anything and everything but pay their taxes. That is a concerning data, because even that 17, you can't take it to the bank. Some of them told you that they will pay because they feel that's the right thing to say. Everybody that said I will not pay had no intention of paying. That's why they told you. They're just being honest. But let's even say the 17% is correct. You can't build a nation with only about 17% believing they should pay their taxes. We asked them why. The number one reason is they said we don't trust the government. Their number two reason is even the one we paid, what are we getting in return? Fiscal exchange. Number three is that even when you want to pay the taxes, the process is complex and is corrupt. 2 in 3 adults said they were asked to pay a bribe in the process of wanting to pay their taxes. When we asked what government should prioritize in terms of spending, they said education, health, electricity, and security. Those 4 demands by the Nigerian people are consistent with the multidimensional poverty index. So Nigerians are saying, get us out of poverty. So we have been saying to our leaders, our political leaders, that if your priority on spending is not aligned with this multidimensional poverty index, you have a wrong priority. So the fiscal system, I'm telling you about our findings, right? The fiscal system inhibits growth. It makes it difficult for us to grow. The tax system lacks proper structure and has distortion all over the place. The laws are archaic and we have arbitrary rules. There's multiplicity of taxes and revenue administration is fragmented. There's huge gap in terms of compliance and the taxpayer record is not reliable. And the others around spending, I will spare you the time. So in summary, the fiscal system is not working. And we can pray, we can fast, we can hope and dream, but you have to go and fix that. Don't try to read the content. You are not meant to be able to read the content. We are trying to send a message. I will use this slide every single time. These are the official number of taxes and levies we've agreed as a country we must collect from ourselves. First column is to be collected by the federal government, middle is state, and to the right is local government. Altogether over 60. All those countries we are celebrating with revenue collection have less than 10. Why should you have this number of taxes? Creating chaos and problems everywhere with no revenue to show for it. Isn't it the right thing to then cut down on the number of taxes? You can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. At the end of the 9th National Assembly, we went through over 250 bills that were at different stages at the National Assembly that they had not passed. We found 40 bills, had one levy here, one tax here, 0.2%. I said, by the time they finish passing this, everybody should just close down their business. We should all pray and hope for where food will come from. It will make no rational sense to do business. We certainly cannot continue like that. So, what is it that we are proposing? Of course, our committee has a lot of work we have been doing, but emphasis today is on the tax bills. So I'll start with what is the principles around those tax bills? We want to harmonize identities of taxpayers to have a reliable taxpayer register. We want to be able to harmonize taxes so you don't have that long list. We want to harmonize revenue agencies and how we administer revenue. We want to harmonize processes and technology, tax intelligence, how we do tax audit and reporting. And as a result of that, major principles are do away with nuisance taxes that place too much burden on your poor, vulnerable, and small businesses and yield very little for the government. Then, focus on high revenue yielding taxes that are broad-based, easy to collect, hard to evade, and they are few in numbers. And then what else should you do? Merge any of those ones left here that are similar or impose on the same taxpayer, on the same tax base, so that you can match them and they are even fewer. And then keep the total number as a guide to a single digit. Somebody will say, where did you find a single digit? We just looked at the rest of the world. Where are they collecting taxes from? And you saw 6, you saw 5, you saw 7. So we said that let's work with a single digit, maximum of 9. And then what else should we do? Institutionalize the reform so that it's difficult for them to be reversed. We are good at reversing things in Nigeria. There was a time, I think it was during Obasanjo's time. So a contract was awarded, the contract was reversed, the reverser was reversed again. I said we are good with reversing. So we came up with these taxes that we said Nigeria should collect. Collect income tax, collect VAT, excise, stamp duties, development levy, collect customs, collect property tax, and what we call harmonized levy for local government. These are the taxes we think Nigeria should collect. All tiers of government combined. Of course, this will be hard, right? Because the Constitution says they should collect more than this. So we've also sent recommendations to the National Assembly to amend the Constitution. Of course, it won't happen overnight. It will take time. But we believe that everybody is on board. Nobody has disagreed with our principles. Our approach at our committee is to always start with principles. So once you agree principles, you then work it out. So you're likely to get more people to agree with you once you agree the principles first. What is the structure of the bills that we sent to the National Assembly? We are guided by these principles of simplicity, harmonization, align your fiscal policies and tax with your economic aspirations. You cannot aspire to be the largest economy in Africa and one of the largest in the world, and then you don't allow investments. You know, that's inconsistent. Your dreams and aspirations are inconsistent with your actions. They cannot align magically. You must take steps to align them. Tax neutrality. Allow people to just do their business. Let me not spend all my intellectual ability thinking about should it be an entity registered with CAC, should it be an enterprise, should it be... So I don't want to do that. I just want to do my business. Don't allow tax to create distortion for how I do my business. It may be that the most efficient structure for me is an enterprise. I then look at the tax and say, no, maybe you should not do it. Go and do partnership. Must be taxpayer focused. Don't go and introduce 7 processes because it's convenient for the tax authority. You should focus on the taxpayer, modernize the system, efficiency of compliance, evidence and data driven, as well as global best practice. So with that, we decided that we would repeal, or at least we have no powers to repeal. We will propose that all the major tax laws in Nigeria be repealed and brand new tax laws be enacted. Because some of the laws we inherited from our colonial masters, the Stamp Duty Act is a law of 1939. How do you begin to patch and amend a law of 1939 to work in 2024? Vastly different words. So, since we know we are not a lazy people, we decided let us write the laws. Assuming you have a country brand new that is called Nigeria, and they say, what should the tax laws look like? That's exactly what we did. Okay, so we have 4 bills. The first one is called the Nigeria Tax Bill. This bill encompasses all the major taxes. Who should pay the tax? What should be the rate? Right? All those charging sections, I don't want to sound too technical. I know consultants are in the room, so they understand what I'm saying. Put all of them together in one place. So if you have seen a copy of the bill, you see part 1, taxation of companies, part B, maybe is persons, part 3, might be VAT, might be CGT. We put everything together in one law. The second one is tax administration bill. How do we administer taxes, federal, states, other revenues? So everything to do with revenue administration is in one place. If you defaulted in paying your VAT on time, and I defaulted in paying my personal income tax, our penalties and interest are vastly different. But what's the principle? The principle of penalty and interest is you denied government the use of the fund they had to borrow. So we don't want you to benefit from delaying your tax payment. So the penalty should be consistent since the principle is the same. So we've aligned all of that as part of tax administration bill. We also realize that at the subnational level, many states do not have the capacity to administer taxes properly, neither do they have the legal framework to set up their tax administration system. So we said, why can't we set a minimum standard that is national? For example, revenue authorities must be autonomous financially and in their operation. You must have professionals. The person leading the revenue authority must have certain level of experience and qualification. We saw a state where they had the deputy governor was the head of the Internal Revenue Service. In another state, it was a medical doctor. I have nothing against medical doctors. I'm concerned that the best job for them is not to do revenue authority work. And one is even worse. The chairman of the political party was the head of the revenue service. And I'm not telling you stories inside Africa Magic. These are real issues that we are dealing with. So those issues are covered in the tax admin bill. Nigeria Revenue Service Establishment Bill is going to repeal the Federal Inland Revenue Service Establishment Act and create the Nigeria Revenue Service. What are we trying to do there? The Federal Inland Revenue Service is not the revenue agency of the federal government. The taxes they collect go to federation accounts, so they are the revenue agency of the federation. So their name is not a true representation of their functions. So we say, let's call it Nigerian Revenue Service. Plus, they should administer all the taxes and levies and revenue for the government. We don't want regulators collecting levies and taxes. In the Fiscal Responsibility Act and in the last budget, we had over 60 government agencies at the federal level with revenue targets. No, that cannot be right. They are not set up and they do not have the capacity, neither the experience or knowledge, to administer taxes. So what will happen is they would misadminister, and who will suffer? The people will suffer. So we have those as issues under Nigeria Revenue Service. The Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill is meant to replace the current Joint Tax Board, but with an expanded mandate and membership. So they will be called the Joint Revenue Board. That same bill, they will help us with harmonization and ensuring consistency around tax policies and administration. Not only will they be advisory, they will now have the teeth to bite. Under that law as well, we have the Tax Appeal Tribunal, so that this time around, the Tax Appeal Tribunal can cover taxes across Nigeria. Currently, the Tax Appeal Tribunal is established based on the FRS Establishment Act. So sometimes, a state will say to you, but this is not my own tribunal. So they cannot meddle in my affairs. So you have personal income tax issue and somebody says, you can't take me to TAT. Now, where should the taxpayer go? And you know, whenever you have these kind of issues, the person that suffers is the taxpayer. So this is really taxpayer-centered. Let's deal with that issue. So TAT, if our bills are approved, we now become a national setup or panel for all tax matters. And this is very interesting. The Office of the Tax Ombudsman. Because we are being sensitive to our female friends, colleagues, sisters, mothers, we say, why does it have to be a man? We remove, and we didn't want to call it ombudswoman. We just remove the man and say it's tax ombud. So in one of the meetings we had with our friends from Europe, the ambassador of the country where they started the ombudsman said, you know, we started it. If you need any help, we can help you. Anyway, we call it ombud. And their role is just to protect the interests of the taxpayer, advocate for them. If they see something is going wrong with the system, they should fix it. Whatever they cannot fix, they should find who must fix it. Imagine today that you are a small business owner, right? We have over 30 million of them. chances are that you are not a finance expert. The percentage of small business owners who are finance people, less than 1%. So you're just a honest Nigerian trying to earn a living. Maybe you are a vulcanizer. Somebody shows up and says, "Okay, you don't pay VAT." The guy says, "What is VAT?" He said, "How about PAYE? How about withholding tax?" The man does not even know what you are talking about. Or you go to a woman that is just selling stuff in Eko Mortar or Alaba and say, "Madam, you don't file returns." The woman doesn't know what you're saying. You know, say anyway, there's a law that says you should do all of this, and do you know that ignorance of the law is not an excuse? Based on our calculation, you are owing the government 4 million naira. Now tell me what that person is supposed to do. They don't know whether you are right or wrong. They are unable to read the law to help and defend themselves. They have no capacity to hire a lawyer or an accountant to defend them. They do not understand the court process, neither can they afford it. They are left out in the cold. The only option they have is to negotiate or to fight. If they fight, they cannot win because they are too small to win the state, right? So they negotiate. "Oga, help me. Life is hard." Oga will bring a private account. If you can pay 2 million here, official account pay 200K, right? You even thank them on top of it. They let you rest for a few months. They come back. They can send a different team. How do you deal with your people like that? We leave them without help. So our policy recommendation is, first and foremost, we think 97% of them should be exempted from all taxes. If you have been following what we're doing, you see withholding tax, don't pay. PAYE, most of them will not pay more than 70, 80K, so don't worry about PAYE. VAT, don't charge VAT. CIT, don't pay CIT. So allow 97% of them to just survive. Then the top 3% that are doing more than surviving should pay tax, right? And if they can't understand the tax system, they can't hire lawyers, then the ombuds is there to help them. They don't even need to speak English. They just need to call and speak their language, right? Then the ombuds takes up the issue on their behalf. Somebody gives you an assessment and says you must pay within 48 hours or we'll close down your business. You call the ombuds, and the ombuds know that there's nothing like that in the law. So we're giving the ombuds the power to tell the tax authority to behave. And if they don't, then they will take their legal actions against them, including reporting them for oversight. So we think that these ombuds will really help us to have a system that is fair, particularly to our vulnerable citizens. So I'll quickly go through some of the specifics of the provisions, and then we take questions. So I'll be a bit fast with this because of time. On the Nigerian tax bill, this is the structure. You find 9 chapters and some schedules. So whether you're looking at issues to do with taxes of income of persons to petroleum profit operation, we've taken the fiscal provisions of the Petroleum Industry Act into this bill. We want everything to do with tax to be in just this bill alone. Don't go and set up one law for gaming and lottery. You put tax inside. Set up another one for insurance. Set up another one for banking. Set up another one for, everything you set up, you put tax inside, right? Then you have double tax relief, stamp duties, so on and so forth. What are they? The first that I want to tell you, but by the way, the recommendations are over 200 new proposals in those bills. So maybe the ones I have on the screen are about 40, 50. So we'll go through them quickly. But this is not everything. So in Nigeria, the law says you are liable to tax on your income derived in, received, brought into, accruing in Nigeria. We said that's too much confusion. Why should you tax me on income that I brought into your country if I had paid tax somewhere else? How about that? So we said let's just focus on income derived or accruing in Nigeria, which means you earn the income from Nigeria. But if you're a Nigerian company, you pay tax on your worldwide income, but we give you unilateral credit. So we don't have that currently, but you get unilateral credit for the taxes you've paid elsewhere, even when there is no double tax treaty with that other country. We eliminate minimum tax on loss-making companies or companies making very small profit. But there will be, and I know this is not popular, there will be 15% minimum tax on profit in line with the global minimum tax regime. It will apply only to large companies, turnover of 20 billion or more, and multinationals. Why are we doing that? We don't want you to take our tax base and give it to another country, because under the global BEPS, base erosion and profit shifting arrangement, if a company is operating in your country and they haven't paid up to 15%, they'll go and pay the balance in their own country. We don't want to lose money to another country. We are the ones that need money the most. So we have that 15% introduced in the law. Employment, taxation in Nigeria. So you only pay tax on your employment income if you are, one, resident in Nigeria, or the activities are partly or wholly performed in Nigeria and you haven't paid taxes elsewhere. All the other conditions we have removed. So it's just cleaner now to know whether you should pay tax in Nigeria or not. A non-resident company shall not become liable to tax in Nigeria just because they hire people working in Nigeria for them remotely. We want to compete with the Philippines that made about $35 billion from business process outsourcing. India made over $200 billion last year. Nigeria didn't even make $1 billion. We have a lot of smart people. Our English and accent is better than the Indians. And the time zone is good. Why are people not coming to hire Nigerians to work for them remotely? Because we have legal framework, including tax and regulatory, that discourage them from doing that. I'm going to say to myself, what's so special about these Nigerian people that because I hired 4 people in Nigeria, I must come and file returns? I'll go to Kenya because they allow me to do it. I'll go to Philippines. So we are saying now, also in Nigeria, we want to be competitive. We've identified those impediments and we are removing them. We have an incentive here for, this is targeted at anyone that is a tenant, but this is not intended to pay your rents for you. It's just an incentive for honestly declaring the rent you have paid. If you declare your rent with the details of your landlord, how much you paid, you get a gift from the government. No, you won't be homeless because it's a legal requirement to disclose it, right? You get a gift. And then government will not say, dear landlord, we are aware that you earn this income. Why is it not in your tax returns? Another one is that the companies that are trying to do the right thing in Nigeria are finding it harder and harder by the day to remain in business. One of the people I respect the most in Nigeria, one of the billionaires, there are not many billionaires you can respect in Nigeria. But this person is very upright. And the person was telling me that in the sector that he's operating, that more than 90% of people there are cowboys. So they are not bothered about this withholding tax of 10% because they know they won't pay anything. The day anybody shows up, they know how to manage it. But you are honest, you're trying to pay everything. But the numbers are all red. So you're going to ask yourself, if I must remain true to my values, I have to end this business. So you're going to end up with a country where only criminals are in business. So we can't afford to do that. So we're saying that if there is tax to be paid, VAT, import duties on an expense or an asset, and you have not paid correctly, or in the case of VAT, it hasn't been charged, you don't need to have paid, but you need to have been charged, you cannot get a tax deduction for that expense. If it's an asset, you cannot get capital allowance for it. So you cannot import stuff and decide not to pay import duties and VAT. And then you go and file returns and you're claiming CIT from the FRS. That will no longer be the case. So we want to make it more expensive and more difficult to do the wrong thing and make it more attractive to do the right thing so we can drive the right behavior. Another one is capital gains will now be part and parcel of income taxes. So if you're a company, add your capital gain to your profit and pay the rates. If you're an individual, add the capital gains to your calculation. The rate you pay will depend on the level of your income. You may pay less than 10%, you may pay more than 10%. But you would also be able to claim losses. Capital losses will become deductible, in those cases. You are exempted from any capital gains if you sell your dwelling house, because it could be that you are desperate. Otherwise, how do you sell your dwelling house? And if you sell your personal car, you also will not pay any capital gains tax. But if you are selling more than 2 cars in a year, we begin to suspect you and say maybe you're a car dealer. Then you start paying capital gains. Then there's exemption for capital gains on shares of up to 100. So if you look at the bills, you're likely to find 100 million there. So we're planning to update it to 150 because of inflation. So about 150 million a year, you won't pay tax on it. And provided the gains you have made is less than 10 million naira. So because we want to promote activities in the capital market, do you know that Nigeria's capital market has a total market capitalization that is nearly a little under 60 trillion naira? If you convert 60 trillion naira to dollars, it's under $40 billion. And it is less than the market capitalization of the largest capitalized company in South Africa, Naspers. So which means one company in South Africa, although the largest, is more than all our banks, MTN, Airtel, Dangote, BUA combined. The market cap of the South African stock market is over $1 trillion. So these guys can finance anything. We can't. We must increase the depth and scale of our capital market to fund our development, especially when you are borrowing at 35%. You need the capital market to work. We are reducing the company's income tax rate from 30% to 25% over the next 2 years. I think this one does not require any explanation. We are introducing a development levy at 4% initially that will reduce to 2% over the next few years to replace all the earmark taxes, education tax, NASENI, NITA, police tax. You just pay this one tax. And then that tax is shared to the agencies. And we wind down those agencies in terms of sharing those revenue, not scrapping the agencies. We wind down the sharing of taxes to agencies. So they should be funded from budgetary allocations and just allow businesses to be, instead of introducing a new tax every time you have an agency to fund. Even the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria got a tax enacted for them. They now collect taxes, including a percentage of market capitalization, so they can fund Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria. We have not seen any other country anywhere in the world where they do anything like that. So this development levy is our way of harmonizing and getting rid of earmark taxes. Incentives are being harmonized. You find a whole section on incentives in the law with a clear framework to prevent abuse. We are proposing the discontinuation of Pioneer Status Incentive Scheme. And then we are replacing that with what we call priority sector incentives under an economic development incentive scheme. So you see sectors have been identified as priority sectors. The amount of investment you must make will vary from one sector to another, right? Power plant is not the same thing as fintech. Then there's a sunset for every sector. This sector, we want to promote the incentive for 20 years. If the laws are passed today, the 20 years start counting from today. In 20 years' time, anybody that has that incentive will run the course of it, but nobody gets a new one anymore. Of course, it's a country we can amend the laws, but we are trying to make sure that we do not set up an incentive scheme that becomes a waste or leakage on the purse of the government after a few years. Unilateral relief for double taxation, I told you about this already. And then we have simplified stamp duty regime, so a whole new stamp duty law, including clarity as to what is chargeable instrument, the manner of denoting, obligation to stamp, when to pay, who to pay to. We reduce the number of items on which you pay stamp duties so that it's easier to manage. VAT will be reduced. VAT will be reduced on 82% of household consumption, and VAT will be increased on 18% of household consumption between 2025 and 2030. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that subsequently. We are introducing electronic invoicing and fiscalization for VAT. In a nutshell, whatever you're doing reflects in the government system automatically as you issue the invoices. If you refuse to issue invoice through government processes, we will find out. And let me tell you how we're going to find out. That's why we invited CFOs and tax consultants. So you know this is not a joke. We want to make sure that vulnerable people don't have to pay tax. But if you are not vulnerable, you must pay. Because if you are not paying, you are creating problems for the system. Right? Fiscalization requires that you see the language in the law. It can be a device, it can be a software, it can be anything. So large companies will just download a software. We're also speaking to the guys who provide your accounting systems to make sure that there's an alignment, because we can do so. You know, we had a meeting with one of them yesterday, but I won't mention them. You download the software. So from now on, anytime you issue an invoice, as you are issuing like this, one is going to the system of the taxman and it's showing there. If you don't have a system where you can download a software, you get a device that looks like a point of service payment machine, POS. And we believe government should be the one to fund it. So they give it to you. Use this one to issue your receipt. You now refuse to use it, whether it's large or small. You know what will happen? Because whatever you're doing, you don't do it alone. You buy things from other people, right? You buy inputs, you buy products. Somebody else supplies you. So we will not ask you what you have been supplied. We'll go to the person that supplies you, because the person that supplies you have no interest in lying on your behalf. Because if they do, it has an implication for them. So we'll pick third-party information. For example, if you buy 100 units of this bottled water from the manufacturer, we'll pick it from the manufacturer because for every sale there should be a purchase, isn't it? And we'll record it on your behalf that you have 100 units of water that you just bought. Every time you issue an invoice through the system approved by the government, if you sell one, we reduce your inventory in the government system to say now is 99 left, right? You ended up issuing 40 invoices through the system, the rest you did not issue. The system of government says you have unsold 60 units. You bring your financial statement confidently at the end of the year. You say life is hard in Nigeria. Closing inventory 10. Say, okay, come. Your inventory is not 10. According to us, it is 60. Can you tell us what happened to 50? Yeah. Yeah, come and explain to us what happened to it. Did they disappear or were they stolen? It's expired. Come and tell us. If we import, as you are importing like this, we are adding the inventory to your record. So actually, the world has so advanced that we don't need to do some of the old school things we are doing to enforce compliance. You can make people do the right thing by just putting systems in place. You will find that in the work we're doing, we have not been talking about corruption. We think that you can fight corruption without mentioning it, if you are really honest about what you're doing. So this is one of the things that excites me the most, this fiscalization. We will grant input credits on assets and services to businesses for their input VATs. So businesses are vehicles for economic activity. Whatever you do to businesses, they will do to you, right? All taxes on businesses are indirect taxes on people. Yeah, so if I'm a politician, I can come out and say MTN and banks, all of you will clap for me, will impose tax on them. They'll just pass it on to you. They are vehicles. So if you reduce the tax on businesses, we are reducing the taxes on the people. That's the concept. So we're allowing businesses to claim input credit on everything. Then there will be excise tax on some services. This is not a popular recommendation, but I will explain the thinking behind it. At the moment, there are three of them: gambling and gaming. Not many people will object to that. Number two is activities in the black market. We're saying, why are you going to the black market to buy and sell dollars? Why don't you just sell it in the official market so we can see everything? What are you hiding? So we want to take the profit margin. You know, it's the margin that drives supply away from official to parallel market. So the language we have in the law is any amount by which the parallel market rate exceeds the official rate is the excise duty you must pay. So if you lose the benefit, then what's the point? You come to the official market and suddenly there's liquidity in the official market. What we actually envisage is that we get to a point where we stop reporting two rates. How many countries is it that headline news, newspaper, radio, TV, NAFEM? So why are you reporting both? And the more we report that, because if anything is worse than Naira not being stable and not being strong, is having that divergence in rates. The third one is the one that is not popular: telecommunication. We are proposing a 5% excise tax on telecommunication. Somebody will say, how did you come up with this bad idea? What we are thinking is that we use this 5% excise tax on telecommunication as the sweetener, or if you like, call it carrot, for local government and state government and federal government to get rid of over 50 nuisance taxes. We will say, like in the telecom sector, they say they pay about 43 taxes. Maybe with our reform, it will be down to 4. We will now say to those local governments, should you go ahead and collect these your nuisance taxes, we will offset, because if these things work as we plan, if you are driving and in the middle of nowhere, some guys show up with some wood and some nails, and they say, oh guy, you're supposed to pay 5K. That's not the place to quote the tax reform bills. That's the place to pay and comply. One thing they do very well is they give receipts and stickers. Just collect it. Once you get to your destination, upload it. Once it's validated, our plan is that you are refunded 100% plus an additional 50% for your headache. And the team managing it takes 50% for the overhead. And the person that collects the tax from you illegally gets charged 200% of what they collected. We're hoping and praying that they will allow this reform to go. We think this is the only practical way to get rid of those taxes. Otherwise, you write whatever you like in the law, they will continue to collect. So we are hoping, and we've discussed this with the lawmakers, that this tax should be conditional on those agreements about getting rid of the other reforms. To be honest, as a Nigerian, I will happily pay 5% on telecom if that will help me get rid of the other taxes that are creating problems for us. So that's the thinking behind that. Then, you know that today if you make donations, are they deductible? What process should you go through before it's deductible? It's too complicated. We've cleaned up all of that. And in Nigeria today, if you spend money on research and development, you are limited to a percentage of profit, which means if you're a loss-making company, you should not do research and development. What are you researching into? This is inconsistent with the rest of the world. So whether you're talking about Uber, Amazon, some of the largest companies in the world today spent over 10 years just making losses. But the American system is so supportive. You can even sell the loss and collect money from someone else and continue with your business. In Nigeria, you're punished for making losses. So we are changing that. So yeah, you can even do R&D even if you are loss making. Feel free to do that. We limit it to 5% of your turnover. You know, some of us do not agree with the percentage, but we say it's good progress from where we're coming from. Less burdensome provisions for reorganization and restructuring. What we have today, you must have been together for at least 3 years. When you finish reorganizing, wait together for another. Why are we waiting? We said the business is not working. Let us move things around to gain efficiency. The more efficient I am, the better it is for the system, the better taxes government can collect. So why are we coming in the way of the businesses? So we fix that. If you borrow to finance your business today, the law will disallow any interest you pay that is more than 30% of EBITDA. Again, that is not fair. We think that this restriction should only be applicable to related parties' loans, not general loans from unrelated parties. For free zones, the concept behind free zones is so we can export, isn't it? Come and set up here, we'll pretend that you are not in our country. Don't pay duties, don't pay anything. Just do what you're doing and export. Concept, I can live with that concept. Then we said, oh, maybe you can sell 25% to the custom territory. And then now, we say, actually, you can actually sell everything to the custom territory. Even when I realized that myself, I couldn't believe it. How did we descend to that level? People completely lack what is important for their country. They became so selfish, self-centered, and corrupt. How do you set up a free zone and it is okay to sell 100% to the custom territory? So you and I in a business, sir. Me, I got free zone status. You are not getting free zone. If I don't like your face, I'll price you out of the market because I'm not paying duties, I'm not paying VAT, I'm not paying CIT. One local government chairman came to us and I was lamenting and said, my biggest taxpayer has become a free zone. I couldn't believe it. He said, this is a physical location, but they can no longer go there. You see people selling there. You can't collect levies from them. They said, this is a free zone. You shouldn't come there. Now, if you allow that to continue, what will happen is, if I'm your competitor, I'll spend my last dime, my last effort to get a free zone, because that's my only ticket to survival. And the more of us that become free zone, the more the taxes disappear. The more the tax revenues disappear, the more the risk that will print naira. The more we print naira, the more the economy is going down towards collapse. There was a time that Zimbabwe had, in fact, I used, in the session we had with the Heart of Rep about 2 days ago, so I brought it, I didn't remember to bring it today. I have 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollar. Is one note, 100 trillion. And as at the time I got it, it was barely enough to buy a loaf of bread. So I got it from my partner colleague in Zimbabwe and gave the guy 10 US dollars. He's still grateful till tomorrow, like 10 US dollars. I collected 100 trillion from the guy and keeping it as a souvenir. This is exactly what happens when government resorts into printing more money, right? That principle is proven 100%. The outcome is predictable 100%. You keep printing money, we're all going down slowly. We can't afford to do that. It's just too much at stake. 200 million people, where are we going to go? So, our bill is saying, if you export 100%, you are fine. Right? No tax, nothing. You export less than 100%, but at least 75% is exported, you pay tax proportionately on the amount that you sell to the custom territory. Should you sell more than 25% to the custom territory, maybe you should not have been in the free zone in the first place. You pay tax as if the free zone does not exist for you. This is what we have. And as you imagine, there are a lot of people pushing back. The amount of pushback I have seen. I'll write a book when I'm done. Nigeria is complex. Some of the interests you are fighting, that you're up against, it will take you months to even figure them out. They're not spoken words, but they are strong, and they are well established, and they are well resourced. Well connected. God bless you, my brother. We're increasing the exemption threshold for small businesses from 25 million naira to 50 million. And we are introducing another indicator of total assets. So if your turnover is small, but your asset is large, like you want to start exploration, like in my friend's sector. You know, these guys deal with large numbers. They may not be making they're not worried that they're not selling yet. They know selling takes time. So we want them to account for VAT, for example. Then I like this one. We have a language in the tax bill that says anything to do with taxes in Nigeria, the provision of that bill will be supreme. Of course, it won't be supreme to the Constitution, right? To any other law apart from the Constitution, to the extent that if there are inconsistencies, those other laws will be null and void. What we want to do is to empower the taxpayer to be able to fight and have the chances of winning anytime they fight. Right? Then, some of the controversial issues. VAT. What are we proposing? So we need this group to understand what we are proposing so it can help us educate other people. So currently, about 82%, let me start with that here actually. This is the Consumer Price Index. What it means is that when a household in Nigeria earns income, where do they normally spend their income? So the MBS classifies all consumptions into 12 categories. So anything you spend in Nigeria will fall under one of these 12 classes. What is the size of the household consumption that is spent on each class of consumption? It turns out 52% of the money we make, we're just trying to eat so we can stay alive. The more the poverty in a country, the higher the percentage of consumption that goes into food. You know, it says food and beverage, right? Beverage there is 1%. Yeah, so just take it that it's food. Just eat. Then, we spend money on housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuel. We spend on transportation so we can move around. Of course, on clothing and footwear, and then we spend on education and health. What we have done, you remember, we looked at the multidimensional poverty index. We looked at other data. And we said that items highlighted in green, food, housing, transport, education, and health, should not carry the burden of tax. Because this is where people are trying to just survive. So if there was VAT, and this is where I can explain some technical languages, which is hard to the general population. If this water is exempt, which is what you find today, it means when you are selling this bottle of water, do not charge VAT. To the ordinary person, they think there's no VAT. To the expert, they know there's a hidden VAT that has not been reflected in the invoice. Why? Because in producing this bottled water, I'll pay for the lid, the plastic, the labeling, and some other services, and they carry VAT. In fact, the equipment I used to manufacture this possibly was imported with VAT. When this item is exempt, all the VAT that I suffer is my business. Remember, whatever you do to business, the business does to people. So when I'm finding out what is my cost of production so I can determine my margin and selling price, I'll factor in my VAT cost. So the amount at which I'll set to you will be higher than it would have been ordinarily if I was able to claim my input VAT back. So what we have done is to say on food, and that's more than 600 items, on education, and on health, it should be 0 rated. So there's no trace of VAT hidden or revealed. So because some people have said, aren't you people being dishonest? This thing is already exempt. You are saying it's 0 rated. So what? That's why, of course, this explanation, I won't even attempt to explain it generally. Because I know it's confusing. But because we have CFOs and tax consultants, they understand what we're saying. So help us explain to them. Now, those are the 3 that are 0 rated. So the others are not 0 rated because it's complex to 0 rate them, like rent, like transportation. So transportation and rent are exempt. Health, education, and food. You know, the reason why we prioritize the 3 is that's human capital development and survivor. Yeah, most important. Then, these 5 items constitute 82% of household consumption. 82%. All the other items combined are 18%. So, on the 18%, the VAT rate will go up in 2025 to 10%, in 2026 to 12.5%, and in 2030 to 15%. That's the bus stop. Remember, whether it's 10, 12 and a half, or 15, businesses will claim back everything. So this tax actually means that for businesses, it doesn't matter what the rate is, their own VAT is zero. So there is no argument of, oh, businesses will pass on the cost. There's no cost to pass on. Because now they are bearing 7.5%, and we're saying whatever the rate is, you bear zero. So for businesses, this is fantastic news. For the customers, if I say to you on 82% of your consumption, VAT will come down. On 18%, VAT will go up. I'll put it differently. On every 5 items that you buy, VAT will go down on 4. VAT will go up on 1. Don't isolate your conversation on this bill. You'll be doing a disservice to the hard work. Because what it means is that even though VAT rate is going up, for me as a person and my household, our VAT bill will come down. Because VAT is going up on 1 and coming down on 4. So let's be very objective in our analysis, even when we disagree. It's 83. Okay, they say it's even more. So you see. Thank you, my brother. It's good to have people like Dr. Fashua in the room. So this is the driver of our recommendation. Let me now go back to, this is the current regime of VAT, and this is what we are proposing. So I just explained this. There are also other states that are collecting consumption tax, entertainment tax, hotel center, event center, taxes. They've invented different names for them. We think it's not appropriate for there to be more than one consumption tax per time. So we're encouraging the states to discontinue with their consumption tax. Of course, you would imagine the hardest to convince should be Lagos State. But I have to put this on record every time. Lagos State has been very supportive. They even gave us the numbers of, and I said, tell me how much you are collecting from consumption tax. It's actually not a lot of money. Of course, it will be a lot for smaller states. But by Lagos State standard, these numbers are barely 1 billion a month. So it's actually small. Say, why don't we just get rid of this other consumption tax? Let's just focus on VAT alone. To make it a sweetener for them, say to the federal government, please, can you cede 5% of your VAT revenue to states? So the federal government collects 15%. Say, start collecting 10. Let's give the extra 5% to states. When we did the maths, based on the VAT collection trend for 2024, that 5% is going to be close to 350 billion naira. It is more than 5 times everything the states are collecting from the consumption taxes. So honestly, if someone does not agree with our reforms, they have something else in mind that they're not telling us. So the other thing is, businesses carry the burden of VAT. We've discussed that. Small businesses have smaller thresholds, so they have the burden. We've raised it. With our threshold, 97% will no longer have to worry about VAT. VAT refund takes forever. I spent over 20 years in the private sector doing consulting. I got tax refund only once in my entire career. In South Africa, you get refunds in 72 hours. Right? They proudly put the number of hours there. It's too embarrassing to put it in days. 3 days. In Rwanda, you get it before you apply. They just see your account and they see that your input is more than your, they credit you. Yeah, they just like, it must be that you are asking us to pay you, but you haven't had the time to ask. Yes. I'm extremely, extremely proud of Rwanda. They're the most impressive of all the countries, including foreign countries. Of all the countries we understudied, Rwanda Revenue Service is the most impressive. The way those guys use data is unbelievable. They even have how they categorize taxpayers. So this default payment is level A. So if you're a very compliant taxpayer, you get refund before you ask for it. And I think we can do that in Nigeria. Let's reward doing the right thing. Then we are saying under our reforms that government should pay VAT refund without an audit. You know where the biggest problem is the audit. The audit does not have beginning, does not have end. Is VAT refund you want? We ask you for withholding tax schedule, PAYE, company ledgers. What are we asking for? What are you asking us? Sometimes when you are frustrated, you now say, I apologize for asking for this refund. You can't build trust like that. So we're saying, pay refund before you find out, before you ask questions. But we also know that we can't just say everybody is honest. What we have now done is increase the penalty for making false claims. God help you, you go and do false claim. You pay the penalty, you pay the interest. The penalty is huge. So which means on your own, do your audit before you come and ask for refund, right? You can get expert to help you if you are not sure what it is. Then exports, only goods are zero rated. So we're saying zero rate everything, services, exports, intellectual property, incorporeal, anything we are exporting other than oil and gas should be zero rated. Then we fight evasion by using fiscalization. So this is the story of our VAT reform. How about the revenue sharing formula? I know it's really not your problem because CFOs are not bothered about how you're sharing between government is the least of the problem of tax consultants and CFOs. But it's good for you to know. Today in Nigeria, VAT revenue is shared 15% to federal government, 50% to state, and 35% to local government. In 1986, the military introduced sales tax to be collected by states. 5 years down the line, in 1991, states were struggling. They were not making any headway. The military set up a committee headed by the late former president of ICANN, Ijewere. Military said, why is this sales tax not working? Should we be thinking about VAT? The committee worked and came up with their finding and said to the government, VAT will be a better tax to collect, but only if it is collected centrally, not by states, because it has input, output, and so many complications that the state cannot deal with. So the military agreed with them, and in 1993, the value-added tax decree was promulgated. And the implementation commenced in 1994. It was collected centrally, and the federal government kept 15% to cater for the administration, capacity building, whatever you want to think about, and to give 85% to the subnational. By 1999, we have the Fourth Republic. We needed a constitution that the military had suspended. They put some Nigerians together, and those Nigerians went into 1979 constitution and replicated it. In 1979, there wasn't VAT. By 1999, we had operated VAT for 5 years, and it was becoming our top revenue yielding tax in Nigeria. But they forgot to put VAT inside the 1999 constitution because they were replicating 1979 constitution. Lawyers will tell you if something has not been mentioned in the constitution, it's a residual matter, and that is for the jurisdiction of the states. That is why Rivers State went to court. It was easy to win. Lagos State went, they won. They enacted their VAT law, both Lagos and Rivers State. I read both VAT law and I panicked because the level of danger ahead is scary. Those laws were worse than the original version of our 1993 decree, taking us back to the colonial eras. Threshold, there was no threshold. Just go and meet vulcanizer and say, okay, you never file VAT. Your tailor is in trouble, even your barber. Take the machine away. Rate of tax, input, output, everything convoluted. And these are like the two most resource states in Nigeria are already getting it wrong. But why is that? Because these states believe that they are making so much contribution into VAT pool and getting little back, which is partly correct and partly incorrect. It is correct to the extent that economic activities in Lagos is expected to be more than anywhere else in Nigeria. But what should it be? We don't know. We have an idea of what it should be. But what is it? The data shows that Lagos State alone gives almost more than half of VAT revenue in Nigeria. But that's because VAT derivation is attributed to states based on where the taxpayer is making the payment of the VAT. When I was a middle-level associate, we used to do VAT based on branches. So banks, the likes of Nigerian bureaus, will do like, a bank will file more than 300 returns. Everywhere you have a branch, you find the next office and do your VAT there. It was a nightmare. When we move to central filing, say file only one return. Usually you do that at your head office because that's where your finance department is. We lost the data that we were collecting about where those activities were taking place. So we solved one problem and created a new one. But that new one is not the business of the business community. So they never complained about it. What's your business with how they calculate derivation? So the derivation that is attributed to Lagos, to Rivers, to FCT are inflated. Because when MTN pays VAT in Lagos, they're paying VAT on the calls that are being made across Nigeria, from Kano to Ekiti to Oyo to Zamfara states. Why should all that credit go to Lagos State? When Coca-Cola sends products to their distributors, they pay VAT in Lagos. Dangote will send cement all over Nigeria with BUA as well. They pay all the VAT in Lagos. So our view is that that derivation is distorted and it should be corrected. What should we do going forward? Let's trace the VAT to the place of consumption and give the credit to that state where the item has been consumed. And because of that correction, we should then allow a state to keep 60% of the VAT derived within their jurisdiction. Today, the amount of VAT that is to the credit of state and local government is shared as follows: 20% derivation, 50% equality, and 30% based on population. We're saying going forward, derivation should be 60%, population should be 20%, equality should be 20%. To be honest, we're very proud of ourselves when we came up with this idea. We thought we would be commended by all the states, apart from Lagos State and maybe River State. So in our view, the tough conversation will be with Lagos State. And so we did. We went to the Governors Forum. You know, our leaders they're always very busy. When they had time for us, they gave us, I think it was 15 minutes. And we stretched it to 25. What can you say with these reforms in 15 minutes? So when somebody picked it up and said, this is against the North, and they amplified it to become what it is now, it was a complete misunderstanding of what we're trying. We have the data. So the states that are suffering from what we're saying now, it's almost all the states, apart from those three I told you: Lagos, FCT, River State, and interestingly, the fourth one is Oyo. Those are the four states that may just like what we are doing now. Every other state is being under-recognized for their contribution. We think it's the right thing to do. Lagos State, you know, of course, they may not like it, but they are supportive. And that's something that I really appreciate. Even this morning, as we're about to start, I saw that the governor was trying to reach out to me. So I went out to call him. In my mind, I was saying, I hope that Mr. Governor will not say, you know, by the way, we are no longer interested. My heart was, God, let him not say that. And guess what? He was still supportive and said, would you come and talk to us at Governors Forum? That's why I'm going to run away once I'm done here. There's Governors Forum this evening, where I'm trying to also get another opportunity to talk to them, because I believe that if they understand what we are trying to do, they will support us. And even if they don't support us, let it be that they understand what we're trying to do and they say, we understand you, but we still don't want. That's really our objective. We think that we owe it a duty to explain. Just keep explaining. So, but we remain positive. We know that our governors love our people. So, I already explained this. Then, you know, this is the one that most people missed. So in the new law that we propose, there's a section 2212 of the Nigerian Tax Administration Bill that says, for the purpose of attribution, any return under this section shall provide details of derivation of taxable supplies by location in a manner prescribed by the service. So when you are submitting your returns as a company, if you have distributors, you tell us your VAT is this amount, and for this month, I send product to XYZ distributors in Ekiti, in Ondo, in Yobe. These are information that you already have in your system. We are not asking you to do anything extraordinary. Just give us that data so that FRS can pick your VAT and attribute it to the states. So, but if you think there will be any complications, that's why we've called the CFOs. Let us know so we can work out the language and the details. So this is just a scenario analysis to say if MTN, by the way, MTN is by far the largest contributor to VAT revenue in Nigeria. The gap between them and second is like heaven and earth apart. So the second largest payer of VAT is Dangote. The third is Airtel. Okay, so we have the top 20. The top 20 alone are contributing like 90%. So we thought that if you analyze the top 20, you are good. So assuming MTN had remitted VAT of 120 billion, under the current model, the whole of this 120 billion is attributed to Lagos State. Of course, I don't want to put 36 states because it will be difficult to read. So we just put one state per geopolitical zone. So just for the sake of our analysis. This 120 is allocated to Lagos entirely. Nothing is allocated to the other states. So we then share the revenue. 20% is based on derivation. Since these guys don't have derivation, they don't get anything. Lagos State gets 24 of the 120, right? And Lagos says, but this is 120 I've contributed. Why am I getting only 24? They want to go and pass a law to do VAT alone. But this 120 is actually not their 120 alone, right? Then there is 50% of the 120, which is 60, is shared equally. That's why everybody gets 10. And then the balance is shared based on population. These are the official population of the states based on the last census. That's what they get. So together, in total, this is the VAT they will share for the month. What are we proposing? Take the 120 billion that MTN remitted, and these are the assumption of how much calls are made from those states. Again, these assumptions may be wrong because we haven't even asked MTN. We just use some guesstimates also based on GDP size of those states. It won't be very far from the actual numbers. So that means the 120 is attributed as follows. And therefore, you share 60% based on derivation. This is what you get. You share 20% on equality. Everybody gets the same thing. Share based on population, you get this. And this is now the total. Look at it. States, the revenue share of VAT to Lagos State has come down. And the VAT for the other states have increased. So why should anybody be in these other states and be fighting this reform? It must be they do not understand it. Or there's something else they are fighting they are not telling us. It's either of the two or both. Next is personal income tax. I know many people in the room are interested in this one. What are we doing to personal income tax? Currently, our personal income tax regime was introduced in 2011, 13 years ago. 13 years ago, once you start earning about 400, 500,000 per month, you start paying the top bracket because you are not the poorest person in Nigeria. Today, you earn 400, 500K. The Lord is your strength. Survival is hard. When you drag if you do nothing to your tax bracket and rate, and there's inflation, we call it fiscal drag. Because you drag the poorest people, you drag them up. They begin to pay marginal rate that is similar to high net worth individual. That's the height of inequality and wickedness. We needed to correct that. Because somebody was asking, if it's not broken, why are you fixing it? I said, but it's broken. That's the number one thing. The second thing is that small businesses are not really recognized like people in employment. So if somebody cannot find a job, they start doing their small businesses. They don't get most of the reliefs and exemptions that employed people get. And their threshold is too small. Then there's a wide gap between various tax regimes. If I set up a business today and it's called Taiwo Enterprises, to produce bottled water, and I'm a honest Nigerian who tries to pay all my taxes, the maximum income tax I will pay, even if I make 100 million naira a month, is 19%. A little less than 19, but let's work with 19. Should I go and make the mistake